Thank you, Dushka. Appreciate that. Hola, and that is how far my Spanish would go apart from few other words. First of all, I am absolutely enthusiastic about this particular region. This is my first time in Mexico. The wealth of warmness that I have received from the people over here has been overwhelming. Of course, this is not the first time for me to be here, but we're gonna be opening our office here very soon, so we're gonna be here quite number of times. The topic for today is a very important and dear to our heart because we've been involved in the fintech side of the business for a long time, and Latam itself has become a lot more important for anyone. The evidence of that can be seen by looking at just out there. We got a lot of clients which are in this particular arena, and they are massively expanding in this particular region. In our panel, we are going to discuss a large number of topics because we do have a limited time. However, I want to go mainly into the adoption, innovation, industry impact, security, and consumer trust. To unfold these particular aspects, I do have a large number of wealth people coming from a very, very highly experienced background who have not only started during the early days of these particular companies, but developed those particular companies to a level where they are in this particular region. So starting with a friend, Tony, I'm gonna ask you please to introduce yourself, how you are immersed in this particular area and your experience to date. And then from there onwards, we will move on to Natalia. If you could please explain that. So Tony, over to you, please.
Okay, can you hear me right? Okay, sorry, I was fighting with the microphone to start talking. So well, as Nahim has presented me, my name is Tony. I'm the country manager of WISE in Mexico. I worked for WISE during 2 years. And practically my responsibilities is to launch the WISE platform in Mexico, formerly known as TransferWise, in order to start offering a new solution for Mexicans to send money for other countries and start receiving money in Mexico. Before that, I could say that I have like more than 20 years of experience in financial services sector. In fintech, I have worked for companies like Uber, like Didi, and now Wise. And in traditional banks, I have worked for Citibank as well as for some insurance companies around the globe. I have a professional experience working also in Singapore, in all the Southeast region for Swiss Re. And well, that's practically me.
Thank you.
We know who's going to be answering all the questions now.
No. I think you will do it. Yeah.
I'm Natalia de Dios, head of business development for Pomelo in Mexico. Is it working? Yes. Okay. I'm originally a lawyer. I litigated for 11 years here in Mexico. I can evade questions if I want to. But my journey started at Arcus. Arcus enabled a lot of companies to have a bill payment platform here in Mexico. Then it was acquired by MasterCard. I transferred over to MasterCard, leading business development for fintechs here in Mexico. And then I joined a year ago, joined Pomelo as head of business development.
Thank you. So let's start with the context of the open banking, and ladies always first. So how would you describe the evolution of open banking? Is this mandatory or regulatory environment? What would you say on that?
So when I got the questions, and somebody in the panel that bailed mentioned that in Mexico it's kind of hard to kind of pinpoint if it was ever something that was voluntary. It became mandatory in 2018 with the fintech law. We are pioneers in this with this law in Latin America, not in the rest of the world. So it started off well. It started off with we say in Mexico arranque de caballo. I don't know how you.
What does that mean? Yeah.
when there's a horse race and the horses, I mean, they start and it's a very fast acceleration, right?
Yeah.
And then we kind of just stopped with the evolution of the fintech law and with the evolution of open banking. It is mandatory. We don't have the infrastructure in terms of financial institutions to kind of pivot to the open APIs and technology because of their legacy infrastructure, because they're such big companies. But fintechs are leading the way in that aspect. So I would have to say it's never been it's not driven by the market, it's driven by regulation, but we're not there in terms of regulation, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, that we're able to have a full-on open banking ecosystem here in Mexico.
What about you, Tony?
Well, in my opinion, I'm really aligned with what you say regarding Mexico, right? If we talk globally, it's a little bit different story, right? Because it begins like something that was voluntary at the moment that it was conceived, right? So because fintechs and startups came with these brilliant innovation ideas, and then I like to make this analogy with football, soccer, right? Because I'm Mexican, of course. What happens then is all fintechs and startups start like playing with this innovation, the ball. Imagine that it's open banking, right? And then we have the regulator that is the referee and was observing, right, how these companies were working with this thing that is new. In behind the fences, there was the public, the customers, right, that start watching this game with great enthusiasm because it brings new things to the market, right? And in the bench, there was the banks that wanted to play, but they were hesitating and waiting to see what happens, right? So of course, the regulators start observing how all the benefits behind open banking, but also assessing the risks, right? And based on that, they start like trying to build this framework, right, to start managing and defining the rules for open banking. In terms of timeline, right, uh, from the moment that open banking was conceived to the moment that it started regulated, it was a very, very thin line in the middle. And we cannot say that if we try to talk about moments, it's difficult to determine when we cross the line, right? Or when the industry start crossing the line. But what is a fact is that now it's regulated and it's a different story depending on every country. In Mexico, unfortunately, right, this is something that's still in a very early stage, but there are more countries, other countries like UK, for example, which are quite many steps forward than us. And I think we have to start like looking these countries to see how it's going to be the future for us, right?
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the countries like UK because when we sit in the UK and we are talking about the UK, we think that I'm going to go back to your analogy of using referee. We think the UK created an environment where fintech and the startups could not really grow because of the red tape around it. And because we are in Latam, we could use UK as an example that where businesses can flourish. Of course, we have seen many different businesses coming, like, for example, Wise, Starling, Tide, and all of those particular ones. But when you compare the UK with the Middle East, the story changes, the narrative changes because the referee over there defines the rule very clearly. And then the startups can come and then they can play an important role. So I'm going to go back to you, Natalia, in terms of the adoption for that one. So in this particular environment over here in Latam, what important roles fintech companies are playing or what they can play in order to expedite this entire innovation of open banking?
So fintechs are pushing, and they're pushing the regulation to kind of have the standardized APIs for financial institutions and kind of move towards open finance, right? To have insurance, to have investments, and to have this kind of open data ecosystem, right? We have here in Mexico what is it? An association that drives, and it's formed by all of these fintechs that are interested in pushing a 2.0 version of the fintech law, right? So it is so going back to your earlier question, it's driven by the government, right? By legal aspects, but it's being pushed by the private sector, which is fintech now.
You know, this is really interesting. It's driven by the government, but what about the demand? Should it not be driven by demand and then the referees should define the rules around it?
I think in in this particular case it doesn't work like that, right? Why? Because the whole concept of open banking established, right, that bankings could start acting on behalf of the customers, and that customer information is going to be shared among the participants of the ecosystem. So that immediately opened the door to different risks, right? And that's why the regulators start interfering in these regards, right? So it's not necessarily the customer's needs what is driven this, but probably now this open banking concept has evolved, and now companies that are very focused on launching open banking initiatives, they are developing more customer-centric solutions. But at the very beginning, customers, we don't know anything about open banking, right? However, regulators and the whole ecosystem start observing the benefits, the pros and cons, right? And they decided, okay, so this sounds like something good, but it's also something risky, right? And they start like trying to manage this. That's why I'm again really aligned with Natalia has said, right? Fintech companies were like the incumbents, right? They are the muscle that can build things faster. They start developing these APIs that start doing very attractive things to solve customers' needs, right? They start creating these MVPs. But then were banks and the regulators, the one that decided, right, how to start consolidating these new tools into the ecosystems to create something that it's more secure, safe, and transparent for customers.
And let me just add something there. So who are the most interested in open banking, and who is it going to serve? It's going to serve the underbanked, right? And who wants a piece of this cake of the underbanked? The fintechs, right? So they're pushing obviously for this 2.0 version of the regulation, of the fintech law, to have this exposure of data and to bring in to the financial ecosystem all of these underbanked people. So, and in Mexico it's a high percentage still. It's not a market like the UK maybe or Europe, but we're very similar to, for example, Brazil, right, in terms of underbanked, to Colombia in terms of underbanked. So yeah, I would say I don't know if the underbanked know that they need this. So, but the fintech industry does, right?
So, from that particular perspective, let's move off the script that we talked about a little bit. Tell me some real good examples from both of you, from your experiences, that have delivered real value, because the product should be developed for the consumer, for the demand. That's what exactly we've been. Some of the examples of the companies within the fintech space which have delivered a great value for the customers by working within that, let's say, a sandbox approach, which is what we have in the UK. Could you give us some examples, Tony, starting with you?
I can give you an example about Wise, right? Not in Mexico yet because we are quite new in Mexico. But for example, talking about UK, right? When this bank that you mentioned, Starling, right, decided to start like entering in the open banking sector and deciding which players they will bring on board, right? They started like looking very strategic partners to cover those segments or to close those gaps where they were not enough good to perform as a traditional bank. So they start doing deals with Apple Pay, for example, for payments, or with Wise at that moment, TransferWise, for perform cross-border payments. So basically, Wise was born right with the idea to solve the problem of move money across countries, doing this in a very cheaper way, transparent and whatever, but they were doing this battle alone, right? Now, when they start this collaboration through open banking with a big figure like Starling, but the open banking concept start like getting more sense, right? So because Wise is offering these capabilities that Sterling by themselves doesn't have, or they have, but no in a very attractive way, and more user friendly as Wise, right? For me, this is a clear example like how these collaborations happens between fintechs and banks in this new ecosystem, right?
And so the financial institutions in Mexico are very rigid, right? Who
Why?
they have their traditional legacy products, right?
Is it because of the lack of trust?
I believe it's lack of technology and lack of evolution within the financial institutions. They're very legacy driven. If that's something that you can relate with. So fintechs are kind of also pushing into the financial institutions, the traditional banks. But the banks don't have the infrastructure to kind of, or they're going to have to, right, move eventually. But I can tell you from our experience, it is so hard to get to this person inside the bank that says, okay, we're going to connect your APIs to whatever we have in the bank, right? They don't even know if they're able to connect through APIs. They don't even know if they have there. Somebody knows, right? But it's like if you have an outlet, they don't know where the outlet is. They don't know if the outlet is even able to connect to a third-party provider's APIs. It's hard to get through the red tape of those financial institutions. They want to offer new and better products for these underbanked because they want also a piece of that big cake that the fintechs are attacking. So the banks have the trust, the fintechs have the tech. We're kind of working there.
Can I just add something quickly? Because we already know, right, that banks to start like integrating with fintechs and start doing these integrations with APIs, with fintechs and so on, start quite slow, right? They are like, they have all this legacy behind them, right? There are like big dinosaurs trying to move one leg after, before moving the another one. But for example, there is also some good cases that we can bring, like successful cases, right? Specifically, for example, Arcus, you work in Arcus, right? Was acquired by MasterCard. And thanks to that, MasterCard can offer in Mexico and other countries pues the possibility to keep offering the Arcus services like bill payments, phone top-ups, and so on to other companies and fintechs that decides to put that services for their companies, right? So for their customers, sorry. So then this is a clear example that with some willingness or probably not necessarily starting the effort in Mexico, but doing the effort from abroad and bringing that that collaborations, right, or those ventures to Mexico, the inclusion could be more effective and more and faster than trying to start everything from here, right? Because here we know that the open banking law is moving a little bit slower, right? There is a lot of hesitation. There is also pues the cultural perspective of the Mexicans that doesn't trust too much in fintechs. They still, or in, sorry, in traditional banks. So they start also trusting in fintechs, but exists like, you know, this part when working with banks and being part of the financial system is still being a problem for some people. They prefer that banks could be neobanks or traditional banks doesn't know anything about their earnings, about the savings, and that's what generates this hesitation for customers to start using this, right? But if we consider, right, that the ecosystem is changing and now banks and fintechs are collaborating together, maybe that could be the mixture that people is trying to look for a start, like trusting more and getting more winning strategies in the country, right?
You know, before I say something, I wanted to go back to the audience, and I wanted to relate that, tie it back with our experience, what we had. In the audience, please do raise your hand if you have a fintech business which is serving the open banking, or you are looking to do something in the open banking. There we go. We have some. The reason for that is what I'm listening over here was exactly the same problem that we had in the UK. Trust, legacy, resistance to move, all of these ones. And then they played a part. But the value superseded than anything else. Companies like I own few companies for myself. We moved away from the legend, these legacy businesses because of the prices, because of the fees that we were paying to these ones. When the neo banking, the open banking opened up, not only they understood the what businesses that we are in, they were easy and quick enough to give us the banking. As a business, for example, I own a business in the real estate, which is Manhattan Luxury Suites. A traditional bank, even though hotel is not a new business, but Airbnb would not make them understand what it is. With Starling, with Tide Bank, these are the neo banks, they were open and that they were clearly on the same day give you the accounts. They had the integration with the government entities where they would pull up your company information. Within 1 hour, you have a bank. Within 1 hour, you have a company ready to operate. So, going back to you guys sitting over here, I think this represents a huge opportunity for the Latam. Because we know people in this part of the world are one of the most hardest working people on the planet. That's why we have so much immigration going to them. And that represents an opportunity. Could you give us some example from your background, like in terms of a sandbox approaches that you have in Latin, especially in the Mexico, where you could see the innovation and the fintech playing part together, and then how quickly could we adopt that?
So innovation in terms of
Technology.
yeah, artificial intelligence, for example.
Yes.
Okay. So we in Pomelo we have an exclusive Slack channel that touches on artificial intelligence only. But in terms of fraud detection, right? Um, uh, authorizations in real time. I think it can go more into I'm in the credit debit prepaid card space. We're a processor. So I it we can give new services and new products to these legacy banks, right? And if we have for example, blockchain makes things a lot more secure, right? But I think it's an ecosystem that still has to be forged, and it still has to it has to state a clear path, right, between technology, who's already playing in the arena, and the government, right? And obviously this all benefits the end user, and it's going to serve the underbanked, right? This is going to make the ecosystem, the fintech ecosystem, the financial ecosystem, something that gives us in Mexico and in Latin America, right? That gives us part of this growth that makes us such an interesting market, right?
I was thinking in some example, and for example, I know about some companies that start using stable coins, for example, for trading, for improved FX rates and so on. And there are companies that start like going directly to the market, launching that. But there are other companies also that are offering these sandboxes. So for companies, for example, like us, to experiment a little bit using sandboxes, right? And try to emulate what is the benefit or the difference, right, of perform like international transfer using fiat, no, as is today, and using stable coins. And from those sandboxes, we can start observing which is the difference, if it's faster, if it's cheaper, and so on. And I think that sandboxes offered by these fintech companies is something good, because we can start elaborating new use cases for those scenarios. And now also with crypto, there are companies that are entering to the space offering liquidity to companies, right? And then they are also opening sandboxes for companies to start like trying to emulate a financial model when they can monitor how the liquidity will be produced or will be absorbed, right? Using specifically models based on crypto, right? So I think that at the end of the day, fintechs always has been recognized for this testing and experimentation, right? And that's why sandboxes are critical. So if someone wants to try to enter the open banking space, right, and try to found a company, to using these sandboxes and exploring different use cases to tackle specific problems or needs from customers, I think is the right way to start like looking which is the business that you want to launch.
What is the biggest business right now in Mexico in the space of open banking, which is Mexican homegrown?
Which is Mexico, born in Mexico or what?
Yeah, yeah, Mexican company, completely competitor to Vice. Or how long are we in that game before we will have a real Mexican company doing everything? Because from where I sit, and then what I have seen, compliance is not an issue. Detecting fraud is not an issue. Onboarding clients is not an issue. Liquidity is not an issue. There are companies which you can just all adopt and easily do the APIs, and then you will have the platform to do that. One of the biggest example of the open banking right now in the UK is with interest rates obviously now started to move slightly lower. If you have a trading account, which we have a lot of brokers over here, they've started to give you the facility of earning interest on your deposits. So you have the opportunity to trade and then make money with that. But the money which is sitting and not deployed in the trading activity can earn interest. That is a very highly attractive opportunity for an individual like myself who we are trading, we have a massive capital. Why would we put that capital in a bank? Because then you have to transfer the money to a broker and then pay the fees and blah, blah, blah. If my broker is paying that kind of money, like a 4% interest on my deposit, and it is actively available to me to trade, that is a real advantage for open banking. That is pushing the legacy banks even further away from the equation. So from you two, I wanted to understand how far are we in the curve of getting these particular individuals? We got some individuals sitting over here who wants to start, or maybe they have started the business. How far are we, given the fact that I know that this is a huge opportunity? When will we see a real Mexican company like Wise, Trading 212, or any of those Starling, Tide, and Clear banks? By the way, I don't have any affiliation with those companies, but I'm just giving the names out. Over to you, Tony, please.
Okay, I think unfortunately in Mexico is still in a very early stage compared with UK. Even when exists a regulation, there are not clearly use cases as those that you mentioned, right? That can be implemented. Companies are trying, right? They know that already exists this field when they can start launching products, but the regulation is still a little bit ambiguous in that regard, right? So I think that it's something that needs to mature a little bit more before we arrive at that point. If we observe in Latin America, Brazil, of course, Brazil has grown like crazy. It's a role model for at the global level, not only in Latin America. But in Mexico, for example, we're still managing a lot of cash, right? Exists the need of cash in Mexico. Exists some other aspects like all these cultural fears that we have, right, to entering in this space that at the end of the day represent some limitations, right? So the first thing that has to happen is that governments and of course regulators has to start like pushing this forward, right? Trying to put this maybe as more mandatory, as we mentioned before. And then I think that banks and fintechs are ready to play
Sorry,
in this
would it
area.
be mandatory? Like they will have to put them as a mandatory?
No, I mean, I'm referring that at the end of the day, right, pues exists a need, no? We as people working in the financial services, we can identify the need, no? The same example that you did about investments and everything. it's easy to know that this is something that we can offer in the market. Why then it's not offer? Okay, it's not offer because specifically to look the authorizations to offer those services in Mexico, there is certain limitations. You can launch a product, right, born and raised in Mexico, but unfortunately with some limitations. That's why you have to look partners abroad, right, to bring that technology. So it's difficult to build something here from scratch yet, and that's why you have to wait a little bit more until people really understand, the rules of the game, and then you have this confidence that you can build something here, right, that is going to serve Mexicans. But now I think that we cannot do that. There is many stages that has to be completed and covered before that happens, unfortunately. But I think that things are progressing very well. But I don't think that we will see soon, a company 100% Mexican, as you say, providing services here. Unfortunately, right? And if you guys that want to create that company, you please shut my mouth, right? I wish that you can success in this field, right? But what we have to observe is that behavior, that scenario, right? Fintechs, banks, and regulators has to work together. It's a process that requires certain education, right? They have to understand the rules. They have to explore together the risks, and they have to define together which are going to be the rules in order to start like offering all these benefits to customers. But it's the educational process that has to keep maturing, right?
What about you?
No, I have an example on one side of the equation. GBM has an app now. It is a regulated entity because it can obtain funds from the public, right? You need to be a regulated entity here in Mexico. But the app works. You can trade in the app. You can invest in the app. So we have part of the equation there. But you can't, and you can send whatever your earnings are to I don't know, to your bank and then withdraw the money. But so it has part of the equation and it doesn't have the other part where you can spend that money, right? So you can trade. It is Mexican. I was making sure with our our expert here because I worked on that account. And yeah, but it's not a full and a complete offer yet.
Now, so just one comment, and it just came to my mind. Something that could accelerate this, right, is now we have this situation, right, with where fintechs are applying for bank licenses, and maybe that could speed the process to arrive to that point that you are asking, right? Because if I'm a fintech now, I have this very fancy, financial services products on my bucket, and then I become bank. Then maybe I will be this first company that offers the whole banking experience to customers, right? But again, it's something that's still exploring. I don't see a fintech having all the infrastructure of a bank, right? Let's see how it goes. We have new banks like Nubank that is doing amazing things, right? But well, it's not Mexican, it's Brazilian, no?
And then on the other hand, we have Story, which is doing all of the card issuance and credits, but it doesn't have this trading aspect, right?
And Mercado Pago, we can keep mentioning examples, but it's difficult, right?
You know, I think at this particular IFX Expo conference, hopefully, is this being recorded? Right. Okay. So I hope that the people with the wealth, a lot of money behind it, they get to see what we have discussed over here because the opportunity is absolutely humongous. And people have only made huge amount of money by just bridging the gap, bringing one idea from one place and taking it to the different part of the world and then deploy it same. Revolut is a great example. A bank, trading app, crypto, custody, all in one with a credit card and a debit card and going into a lending business very soon with that one. What I want to say is, I think given the fact that what we have seen in the last 2 or 3 months around the world with Trump being in the office and seems like the end of era of globalization, everything is me first, I do this and I do that, I think the time would have plenty of a tailwind behind it, where people will think we have to think ourselves first because we are being pushed out from other opportunities. And it is a situation like this which gives birth to bigger and a better opportunities. It's been a pleasure to host both of you today at this panel, and it has been absolute pleasure for me to visit Mexico. Please give a huge applause of hand to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.